How's everybody doing? Good to be with you on a Sunday morning once again. Lovely to be in this space with these people. And those joining us on Facebook and YouTube, welcome as well. We would love to have you visit us in person when you can get around to doing that, but no guilt, no pressure. We'd just be happy to see you in person. So before we get things moving in our spiritual service, we do have some housekeeping, really roof repairing opportunities. This is Raise the Roof Gala, and this is to benefit Unity of Stuart. It's a dinner dance entertainment evening. That'll be Saturday, the 29th of April. Beginning at 6 p.m., there are these cards around the church. You can pick one up on your way out. It's $75 per person. You get a catered Italian dinner, dancing, raffles, and fun. So you can purchase your tickets here at the church or go online at unityofstuart.org. Okay? So, Roberta, anything you want to add to that? Okay, so you heard the lady. Roberta, it's going to be here, right? Yes. Yeah. I heard there's break dancing too. So dress accordingly. All right, so good morning once again. Hello. And we are going to be shifting gears now. As we do on a Sunday morning, we like to open up these deeper places within us to find that there is a truth waiting to be revealed, a truth that is going to utterly change the way you experience yourself in your world. And it can only be discovered in this moment. And it's not in any way related to the past, and therefore we have to come fresh every moment to this opening, to this invitation. To understand ourselves in the light of the present. And so that's a really, it's an invitation to empty out. Like, this is the idea of the Sabbath that we were brought up in, probably as within this Judeo-Christian culture, that the Sabbath was a day of total rest. It was a ceasing of work, as we know from the biblical tradition. And it's basically saying that we unplug from the 6 days of going out there and earning a living and doing things related to the world and to the body. And the Shabbat, or the Sabbath, is a way of emptying out or resting from this idea of always living for the body and always paying attention to what's going out there in the world. It's a way of ceasing, stopping, resting from that. And in fact, it's really getting in touch again with this sacred depth, sacred time, right? Shabbat is part of the calendar, but if you look at it within the Jewish lens, it's the holiest day of the week because according to the Jewish tradition, the Shekinah, or the presence of God, joins with the human experience in a way that's very different than during the 6 days of the work week when we're paying attention to outer things. And so as we pay attention to inner things, the presence of God comes in very strong. And so that's kind of what we carried over within the Christian tradition, as you know, that Sunday was the day of the Lord, the day to go to church. And lo and behold, we're still hanging on to a remnant of it, because here we are on a Sunday morning at church. It's just we are evolving. See, this is the other thing that we want to look at within these traditions that we love to play with. There are multifaceted aspects of God, and if we just focus in on one tradition, we oftentimes become pigeonholed into thinking it's only that way. And we build up these exclusive worldviews that other people are not invited to think differently because they don't hold our tradition. And so that's kind of why the church is emptied out in many ways over the past few decades, because of this exclusiveness that has literally put people into a place of feeling like God is not really that all inviting or welcoming. There are certain things that, I find that resonate with me that don't seem to resonate within this tradition, so I can't be part of that anymore. And so many of us have vacated and come to places like Unity because within the name itself, it's inclusive. I mean, it's part of our description as a church. We include everyone. We welcome everyone. And that is much more the nature of God. It's actually what you see Jesus doing in his renovation of the Judaism of his day. That when he sat down to dinner, back in that part of the world in those days especially, your table was your social group. So whoever you had at your table was your inner circle. And therefore, the Jews ate with the Jews, the aristocracy ate with the aristocracy, the slaves ate with the slaves. Like everybody was insular in their table experience, right? Nobody that was not part of that group was invited or allowed. And so with Jesus, you see everyone at the table. You see the rich, the poor, the prostitute, the people that are not held in high esteem in society, like the tax collectors at that time. Everybody's welcome at this messianic table. And so this is the idea of an inclusive spirituality. It's when your inner eye opens and you begin to really see the true nature or essence of being, you realize that there's one self taking many forms. And this one self, as we know within these traditions, is having amnesia by identifying with the world and the body. And as a result of falling asleep or forgetting itself within the world and the body identity, we need a Sabbath in order to remember. We need to stop and rest from always going out there as that individual self and come back to the divine presence. And in that coming home to the divine presence, we see unity. We actually begin to cultivate a sense of inclusiveness because by nature we are the being in all beings. Doesn't matter the clothes or the costume that's temporarily decorating that spark. We are that spark. And if we're resting and quieting down to attune to divine presence, we begin to feel and think and move or act from this deeper place where, like Jesus, we will go out into the world transformed. Our minds will be renewed. We'll have a different vision. And so that really is the essence of spiritual life, is to cultivate this inner or higher vision, right, that comes from the light or divine presence within. And so, within these teachings, especially you get this in Buddhism, the image of the lotus. And if you know anything about a lotus, you know that it grows out of a swamp. It grows out of mud. And as it grows, it begins to extend beyond the confines of where it was growing, and it blossoms into this beautiful flower that's utterly untouched by the mud, rooted in the mud, but flowering high above it and completely stain-free. And in Buddhist terminology or psychology, they look at this as a symbol of the enlightened mind, that it's growing within the world, and yet there is a potential within you as you are growing within the world to overcome the world, to open to the divine light above, and to be in the world but not of it, like the lotus flower. And so this is the flowering of divine consciousness that is also, again, represented heavily within our biblical tradition. This idea of the Word or the Christ mind as a seed that's planted within you as the heart of the world. And you know that parable that as the sower goes out to sow, he sows seeds. Some falls on, the pathway where everybody's walking, gets trampled underfoot, or the birds come and eat it up right away. Other seed falls on rocky soil and sprouts right away, but then withers. Other seed falls into thorny bushes and it gets choked out, it can't grow. And other seed falls on good ground. This is the heart of the world that he's talking about. There are some hearts that are so busy with the activities of life that they let the things of the everyday trample them down, or the birds of the air gobble that up. And then in the secret time that he spent with his disciples, they asked, like, what does all that mean? You tell them stories, but what does it really mean? What are you really trying to get across in that story? And he says that when the seed goes on these busy places, if your mind is too busy or your heart is too busy, the birds of the air come and gobble up that word, which is your divine potential. And he calls the birds of the air the wicked one. We can call it the ego. So if you're getting the word and your mind is still occupied with the world and the body, and all you're living for is the world and the body, the thoughts that you are the body are the ego. And so that sowing of the divine potential in you won't ever take flower. It won't grow, because your ego thought will dismiss it right away. You're back to being the you that you know. This seed will transform you. This seed will take you to a place within yourself that is undiscovered as of yet. Your divine nature, where you're one or unified with holy presence. That's you. See, this is the beauty of it, as it says it in the early teachings of the church. Muhammad said this. You get this all over the place. When you discover who you are, you discover God. The real you and God are in the same place. When you see yourself, you see the Lord. Like this is the beauty of it. When you really sit within who you are, you're home in heaven, one with God. So that's the word of that we're seeing here, that being sown in the heart. But you can't know that about yourself if you have another version of yourself that you're really beholden to and too busy to get out of being. So the seed that falls on the stony ground takes sprouts right away. That is that we actually sometimes get the message, oh my God, I really feel this. I love this about the teaching. And I'm opening to divine presence. And all of a sudden we're like full of ecstasy and happiness, and we want to know more. But then other things start to come along and we kind of just lose interest and fade out. And he says that's when, it takes root, it sprouts. But then he says the sun comes up and it begins to wither the sprouts that were growing. And he says the sun, the sun is basically when the heat gets turned on in your life. So you have options there. When the heat gets turned on in your life, you can start meeting it as divine presence. You can see it as opportunities to evolve into your spiritual nature. That's what it's really for. It's a training ground. It's to cultivate you and strengthen those spiritual muscles. But if you're superficial, like you're on stony, rocky ground, and you don't have deep roots, if you don't have deep roots, the heat's going to get turned on. You're going to go back to your old way. It just, you'll fall into the trap of meeting it with that reactive mind, whatever that challenge is. And so he says others fall amongst the thorns. This is, again, you're the heart of the world. And if your heart is thorny, that means you're, he says, more interested in riches and pleasure seeking and the things that will, titillate and entertain you. And so if you're really into entertaining yourself and indulging yourself more than seeking God, those thorny parts of you and your heart are going to choke that seed and it won't grow. And then finally he says, on good ground, you start to really grow and flourish and, produce fruit in your life. And this is what the teaching is for. It's designed to actually feed you, create in you the abundance that flows out from you so that you don't depend on the world for anything. You depend on the divine presence within you, and it shows up in the world. This is very different. It literally, and this is the other thing that you hear talked about by biblical scholars like Walter Brueggemann. He says the Sabbath is a revolutionary statement. For the Jewish culture coming out of Egypt at that time, they were under the regime of Pharaoh, which is another symbol of the ego. The tyranny of the ego is, as we can see in our culture, you work 24/7. You don't get a day off. You don't get holidays under Pharaoh. The Sabbath was everything rested. The stores shut down, the land rests, people rest, animals rest, every living being that has breath rests. You saw that in the pandemic. When we first went into lockdown, everything rested. Do you remember the smog disappeared from over LA? There was no smog. And everything was able to kind of find their natural rhythm again. This is the idea of Sabbath. It's a revolutionary statement where you stop the drive to get, which is empire, always more, always out there. And as you begin to rest in this way, like we're saying, you come to the abundant life that Jesus talks about. And that abundant life takes care of you. That's why he says, in the Sermon on the Mount, look at the lilies of the field. They neither reap nor sow, and they don't toil or spin. But Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one of these. And Jesus meant that in a very subtle way, that Solomon followed the regime of Pharaoh. If you trace that Israelite history, Solomon began to pick up that Egyptian way of being, heavily taxing the people, really keeping the economy an economy of extraction, where you're taking from the poor to feed the aristocracy. It's a form of tyranny. You're dominating weak people. And the prophets always railed against this. Jesus came to give a different view of life. That's why he says, look at the lilies. Solomon in all of his glory, even trying to get with the Pharaoh's regime, couldn't do what's being done before you through the blessing of God. That's why he says, you rest in that divine presence, and God knows you have need of all of these. But don't go after it like the Gentiles, like the Pharaonic regime. God will bless you more abundantly. You're more precious to him than the lilies or the sparrows that he feeds. But we don't trust that, do we? We've been indoctrinated in the Pharaonic system that we have to get and grab what's ours before somebody else does. We can't rest. There's no time to rest. Are you kidding me? And all of our religions in many ways have been co-opted by this. Right? They validate the extraction economy. Lately in the past 10 years or so especially, we've really polarized within our religious culture in this country, where a lot of the traditional evangelical churches are pro-Trump and are really seeing Trump as God's president. Like the Bible would never get in alignment with something like this, right? And it's not to say that the left is the way that the Bible would go. The Bible doesn't polarize into politics at all. In fact, the Bible's message is very anti-political in the sense that we're saying here, like God's regime is to be over the society of human beings, where everyone gets to prosper, where everyone gets to feel their own innate abundance, where everyone gets to actually walk in blessing. And so why I'm saying it this way is because if we're coming at life from this superficial place, we will have superficial religion. And superficial religion will never get to the place that we can feel the blessing. And so our first reading this morning kind of goes there with the teachings of Rumi. Now, Rumi was living in an Islamic setting, and he was a religious scholar, and his dad was a very high-level mystic but all within the Islamic worldview. And Rumi actually met somebody by chance, seemingly, by the name of Shams of Tabriz. And Shams was this wandering, seeming lunatic, didn't fit in with the norms of Rumi's time and Rumi's religion. And yet Shams was fully enlightened. And his name actually means sun, right? The sunshine. And so when Rumi encountered Shams, he encountered a depth that he never realized was possible within spirituality. It blew his doors off. And in fact, he composed a whole work of teaching dedicated to his time with Shams. And this is a bit of it. This is called Rumi, the Big Red Book. It's the great masterpiece celebrating mystical love and friendship, translated by Coleman Barks. And this is some of Rumi's ecstatic poems and prose related to his experience with Shams. Now listen to how Rumi gets out of the superficial life and opens his heart to something beyond the world and encounters the living word, the living presence that unifies all life and includes all life. He starts with this one, or we start with this one. The oldest thirst there is. Give us gladness that connects with the friend, a taste of the quick, you that make a cypress strong and jasmine jasmine. Give us the inner listening that is a way in itself and the oldest thirst there is. Do not measure it out with a cup. I am a fish. You are the moon. You cannot touch me, but your light fills the ocean where I live. Okay, very enigmatic, and we'll go through it. So give us the gladness that connects with the friend, a taste of the quick or the living. And notice he says, you that make a cypress strong and jasmine, jasmine. So part of this is that everything that is related to the spirit is also very natural, like agriculture, like trees growing, seeds, right? So the word is a seed. It's also showing you that this is a natural process of life. Things in nature grow, things within the spirit grow. Your spiritual potential is a seed that has to grow. And so it grows, he says, by inner listening. Right? This is what we want to cultivate in meditation. Right? Some of the methods of meditation involve just sitting, just being open and allowing whatever's arising to arise and feeling it energetically, vibrationally, with openness, no judgment, an inner attuning to divine presence. Give us the inner listening that is a way in itself and the oldest thirst there is. Do not measure it out with a cup. So this inner listening opens us to vibration which doesn't have boundaries. It fills the space. This inner listening opens you to the field, right, where Rumi says he'll meet you. Remember that poem? There is a field beyond right and wrong, beyond good and evil. I'll meet you there. And we will giggle at the thought of being bodies together, essentially. That you go beyond form, beyond limitation. And that opens up to us through this inner attuning or inner listening. And then he says, I am a fish, you are the moon. Right? you cannot touch me, but your light fills the ocean where I live. So in a way, the divine presence is beyond us, right? And what we can do is mirror it. Like the ocean picks up the rays of the moon. We, in our hearts, can pick up the rays of the divine sun. And we reflect that within the world. So there's a opening through listening and a receiving of the rays, and then a shining out, reflecting the rays, right? So that's really what's part of stilling or quieting the mind. When the waves of the mind, like the waves of the ocean, can go still, they can pick up the radiance from above and reflect it. It's part of the Sabbath, to get still, so that the outside forces are not causing a lot of waves, and we can attune to divine presence and then shine with that light. And then he says here, and the reed flute's work. I say to the reed flute, you do the work, but you know sweet secrets too. You share the friend's breathing. So again, here we have this idea of doing the work and knowing the secrets too. And the secrets involve sharing the friend or God's breathing. So we do the work, but then we're empty. Again, the Sabbath idea. And the breath or the divine presence can blow through us. We can feel it. We can commune with it. And then the reed replies, he says, or the reed says, knowledge is for total destruction. I say, burn me completely and leave no knowing. So again, this is getting out of the world. The knowing of right and wrong. You can't find the field if you're lost in right and wrong, which is out there in the world and duality and thinking. You got to rest from that. Burn that up. And then we can feel the breath. We can find the unity. So then he says, how could I, when it is knowledge that leads us, let go of knowledge? How can I trust that if I let go of what I think, that I'm going to find what's being promised? And then Rumi says, but that knowledge has lost compassion and grown disgusted with itself. It has forgotten about silence and emptiness. So a lot gets thrown into Rumi's poetry, right? Very dense. This knowledge of right and wrong, this knowledge that's about us as bodies in the world, is always filled with, this judging, evaluating, comparing, contrasting, always thinking turbulent thoughts so that the waves of the mind are always restless. And at the end of the day, if we really sit with it, when we're identified with this relative knowledge of being in the body and the world, we have anxiety because we're actually cut off from the silence. And that knowledge can never give you the peace. You can't find peace in thinking. So he says, burn that up. Let that stop so that you can come back to the silence and the emptiness, right? The stopping the work of the mind. So we want to do that. So these words will just add more work to our mind if we don't follow them back into the silence, into the emptiness. You know, many of us know that story of when the Buddha sat in front of a crowd of people waiting for him to speak and teach. He was sitting there for an inordinately amount of time and not saying anything. And everybody began to fidget. And they're like, you know, we came here to hear him talk. Why isn't he talking? And he just kept sitting. And people became even more fussy about what their expectations were not being met. They're waiting. You're keeping me waiting here. And he still just sat. And then he leaned down, picked up a flower, and began to just stare at the flower. And everybody's like, what is this guy doing? And he just kept staring at the flower. And then his disciple, Mahakasyapa, who was sitting next to him, looked at him. And you could tell that Mahakasyapa got it. And when the light went on in his eye, the Buddha handed Kasyapa the flower, so the story goes, and says, you will take my lineage forward when I'm gone. That's one of the Zen koans in the Genko Roku, Japanese Zen tradition, starts with that. That's the lineage of how the lineage of Buddhism continued with Mahakasyapa. And it was a silent transmission, they say in Zen, from mind to mind. In order for that transmission to take place, you have to have burned up those thoughts of right and wrong and concepts and me and I'm getting impatient and what about what I came here? Like all of that goes. It burns up. And you stop going out there for your answers. The flower has your answer. Everything has your answer. But if your mind is restless and you're caught in this worldly knowledge, it's right here. You can't see it. And so this is what Buddhism seeks to cultivate by quieting the mind. It's right here once the mind is quiet. But we're accustomed to be outside of ourselves. And, you know, we've been brought up in Egypt, you can say, under Pharaoh. We don't realize this. You know, in our Seth book study that's, you know, just starting again on Tuesdays, we're looking at a book from Seth called The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events. And what Seth is saying there is that you are embedded within culture. And it's part of the way that you process and interpret your life and what you think is possible and how you think of God. A lot of it, if not most of it, is infused by your cultural upbringing. You're like the lotus growing out of the mud. You don't realize that how much that mud has been influencing your growth and development. And so one of the things that keeps us from knowing the divine presence is we've been given this interpretation from our culture of how to think about the divine presence. And in our Western culture, it is thinking. We're supposed to think it. that you can arrive by thinking. And the East knows that's the way into illusion. You'll never find it by thinking. And what are you finding? Yourself. Yourself, which is the light of all being. So the importance of Shabbat, again, is really this broader notion of emptying and listening. Getting present to the thirst. Because as he says in A Course in Miracles, there's a part of you that yearns to go home so unceasingly. It's the flame in you, that divine flame or spark. And that flame, its nature is always to go up. A flame's dharma is to rise. It never stays on its fuel. It's seeking the height. Just like the lotus is seeking the sun. That flame in you is trying to go home. And if we cover it over with our right and wrong thinking, we create this cloud cover that keeps us from joining the above, knowing the above, which is ourself. So by quieting, you clear. And then you begin to see how your mind works. You see how thinking works. And you become very acutely aware of how thinking takes you outside of yourself. And then you get lost in phenomena. You get lost in symbols. You get lost in the external forces of the world and the body. So in A Course in Miracles, he has this journey very much like we're describing this morning, where yourself is beyond all symbols. Yourself is not found within the phenomena of your mind and the forms of the world. We have to get very quiet and listen and empty. And he says in this paragraph, seek not yourself in symbols. There can be no concept that can stand for what you are. So when we talk about emptying, we're talking about emptying who you think you are as your story, your name, what's possible for you, what's been done to you, what you've done to others. All of these ways that we've entrapped ourselves in limiting beliefs that seem like facts about who we are. And this can be a little unsettling as you give up the underpinnings of your reality. And that's why a lot of us, if you're really honest, don't want quiet. We don't want stillness. We don't want to empty out. We want to go, go, go. Tell me what I got to do. All right, I want to be enlightened. Tell me what I got to do. And it's none of that. And so when we recognize that our self can never be found through thinking or doing, how could it be? It's eternal. It doesn't change. You were created, if you will, enlightened. The only way we can discover that is give up trying to find it outside of where it is. It's at the very core of our being. Thinking's out there. Seek not yourself in symbols. There can be no concept that can stand for what you are. What matters it, which concept you accept, while you perceive a self which interacts with the world and reacts to it as if it were real. Your concept of yourself is quite meaningless, and you will not perceive that you can interact but with yourself. And then he says, and this is the idea of that journeying, that growing, and opening to the flowering that we've been talking about. He says, you will make many concepts of the self as learning goes along. So you're going to get the spark of the word. You're going to wake up to the fact that, I want to go on this journey of self-discovery and awakening. And as that unfolds, and you probably know this by now, many of us are quite seasoned here, that when you're on the path, what you believed 5 years ago, it's like you kind of giggle at it now. Who you thought you were 5 years ago, it's like, oh my God, at the time I was doing my best and I had that wisdom, and now I've shed that. Like there's a new view that is so much clearer than it was 5 years ago. So along the way, we keep doing this. What was once the floor that we were standing on falls out. That's why he says, along the way, you're going to have these concepts of yourself that seem secure, and now I got it. This is who I am. I can rest here. And then the floor falls out. And you're going to go through a disorienting process as the floor falls out. He says, each concept of yourself that you have along the way will show the changes in yourself and in your relationships. Right? There will be some confusion every time there's a shift. Does anybody attest to this? You have this feeling of crystallizing and clarifying for yourself your spiritual insights, and then I thought this worked. I thought I got that. Now I just feel like I'm lost again without a compass. What the heck happened? Growth, development. And so you shed that concept. The floor falls out and you're disoriented. Like, where's bottom now? I'm in free fall. And then you land. And you're able to integrate a deeper experience and a deeper part of you. And now you kind of develop another concept of yourself based on this view. Oh, so this is John now. This is where I'm seeing life from now. And there's still a me in here that's doing the seeing, right? It's still a symbol. So that's going to eventually go. So he says, every time you shift, you shed that symbol of yourself and you find a deeper you. And then you symbolize that. And then that'll shed. And be sure and happy in the confidence that all your symbols, let me read it this way here. He says, there will be some confusion every time there's a shift, but be you thankful that the learning of the world is loosening its grasp upon your mind. Because if you know the New Testament says that we're heading towards a universal Sabbath. It's not just a day of the week. It's an eternal state of mind. The world will loosen its grasp on your mind. You will finally rest from the world forever. You will not be under the regime of the ego anymore. Be thankful that this is happening. Every time you feel disoriented along your growth spiral, you're coming into greater opportunities to discover the rest that is being made available. And now get this, and this is something that I often giggle at. He says, and be you sure and happy in the confidence that the learning of the world will go at last and leave your mind in shalom, in peace, in completion. Then he says the role, this is like out of nowhere right now, he comes with this idea. The role of the accuser will appear in many places and in many forms, and each will seem to be accusing you. As you go through this spiritual growth, the ego is going to come in to try to hamstring it. The role of the accuser, Jesus is picking his words carefully in this teaching. The accuser is a name for the Satan, the devil in the New Testament, the accuser of the brethren in Revelation. So he's saying, as you're loosening the learning of the world from your mind, there's going to be antagonism. So sometimes you're like, I'm really getting clear, like I don't want to get lost in my old illusions anymore. And then all of a sudden, somebody comes to reinforce those old illusions for you. They are saying, you can't wake up. What are you, silly? Like the accuser will come and take the form that stresses you out, freaks you out, pisses you off, makes you fearful, makes you anxious, something to doubt the process, something to stall, and something to reinforce that the symbol of yourself is the real you. That yourself is a symbol. But then he says, but have no fear. It will be undone. So when the voice of the accuser comes in whatever form, and you'll know what it feels like when that's the accuser making you wrong, it could be internally. It can show up in any form, visible or invisible, but it's always there to stall or to raise doubt or to derail your flowering. He says, don't worry about that. It'll be undone. And then he says this, the world can teach no images of you unless you want to learn them. So this is up to you. Do you burn up that knowledge of the world and say, I've had enough, I want freedom, I want out of the ego regime, and I want to come home to this rest and this peace? Or do you buy into the magic and the allure? Now, this is one of my favorite passages. There will come a time when images have all gone by, and you will see you know not what you are. You're not an image. You're not a form. You're not something that you can think about. It is to this unsealed and open mind that truth returns, unhindered and unbound. Unsealed and open, kind of like what we were saying earlier about this inner listening. Just, you have to be receptive to listen. An unsealed, open mind, truth can return. And you can realize in this listening, because remember, when you're listening, you're spacious. And they make this distinction in Jewish thought that when you're looking at something, you're seeing it within a particular form in its finite, limited way. Particles, right? If you want to go quantum, you're seeing particles. When you're listening, you're experiencing waves. And waves fill the space, right? So when the mind is open and quiet, it opens to that wave-like nature. That's why in the Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutra, Buddha says, or rather Vimalakirti says to Subhuti, listen as one born blind. It's a very good insight in how to meditate. You'll see things, right, that can't be seen with the physical eyes. And then this amazing paragraph goes on. He says, it is to this unsealed and open mind that truth returns unhindered and unbound, where concepts of the self have been laid by, is truth revealed, exactly as it is. When you lay aside all concepts of yourself, like the reed of Rumi, emptying out, and asking in that poem to have all of its knowledge burned up. All concepts, all symbols, burn them up, please. Put them on the altar for sacrifice. Renew my mind so that I can see the unseen. He says, when every concept has been raised to doubt and question and been recognized as made of no assumptions that withstand the light, then is the truth left free to enter in its sanctuary, clean and free of guilt. Again, very important spiritual teaching here, a method, if you will. When every concept has been raised to doubt, I'm not this limited idea. I can't be this limited form. Right? This is part of that process. You get very quiet, and then you do deep insight meditation. Right? In Buddhism, it's called shamatha. You get very quiet, and then you do vipassana. You look clearly at the phenomena or the symbols that are rising in the mind. And with this quiet insight, this wisdom eye, you begin to see that it's all emptiness. All of this phenomena is put together, constructed out of nothingness. And because of this steady, quiet insight, it can't withstand the light of your inner scrutiny. And it literally dissolves under the light of your insight. And what's left? He says it. Then is the truth left free to enter its sanctuary, clean and free of guilt. In other words, your mind comes to rest in its own nature, in divine presence, in the eternal Sabbath. And then we end with this. You got to listen to this carefully. There is no statement that the world is more afraid to hear than this. What is it? I do not know the thing I am, and therefore do not know what I am doing, where I am, or how to look upon the world, or on myself. Right? All the learning of the world was to give you this knowledge of being certain you're the ego body, and that you are, so-and-so, born in this ethnicity, born in this country, born to this family, went to these schools, do this for a living, married this woman, live here, these are my kids, this is my dog, I got the 401, I'm all together here. I got my identity. That's the learning of the world. You made a self for yourself along the way. Now you can rest. But there's no rest in that world. There's a thirst that never got quenched. I'm not these symbols. I love my kids, but I'm more than just a dad. I love my wife. I'm more than just a husband. There's something about me that's undiscovered. What is it? I can't put my finger on it because you can't think about it. It doesn't come in that way. It comes with quieting, letting go of who you thought you were, cutting away the learning of the world. Because what we're doing oftentimes is, okay, I've arrived here. Now what do I got to do to wake up spiritually? I'm this guy with this family and this job and this past and this story. Now I want to add to my story. That this guy is waking up. Can't build on a false foundation, Jesus said. That's all sand. You got to go to the rock. And the only way to build your life on the rock is you got to let go of what you believed yourself to be. That's the cross. If you want to look at it symbolically, that's exactly what he's saying here. There's no statement the world dislikes more, right? The cross is foolishness to the world, right? Killing of the self is foolishness. I do not know the thing I am. Like, let that sit in for a second. Like, is that viable for you to contemplate right now? Would you accept that? You really don't know who you are? Because we all sit here posturing like we do. I know I'm doing it when no good thing is coming out of my mouth, no matter how I try. I can't give you freedom if I'm being John. If I don't know who I am, then the breath can blow through. I'm empty. I'm not trying to be somebody. And that's when I get blessed. That's what we were talking about earlier. Don't toil or sow. Don't try to look into the realm of the ego for your sustenance. The blessing will come through and bless your life. But you have to recognize you don't know. He knows. God knows. So then finally, I don't know the thing I am, therefore do not know what I am doing, where I am, or how to look upon the world or myself. In this learning is salvation born. And what you are will tell you of itself. That's the beauty of it. So you come here this morning, and I know we're at time, you come here first to get annihilated. The self that you think you are and all the symbols that you think are real get annihilated. And then you can get still and recognize your inner thirst. And then open up and unseal your mind and reach out into the spirit realm with this listening, attuning. Go beyond the boundaries. And then something comes in, a breath. And it's more than you thought you were. And then it begins to teach you from the inner planes. And then you'll see the world through that vision. That's all I got for this morning, folks. Blue bag's going to go around. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, you can click the link and donate. The church and I are very grateful for your support. And remember, Raise the Roof is coming up, and this is on Saturday, the 29th of April. Please, please, please help build our roof back. We need your support. You'll get some pasta and eggplant and be able to dance. I know. Bless the offering. Get you guys out of here. That was like the best thing when I was little and I was sitting in Catholic church. You know, masses ended, go in peace, and may God bless you. I was like, yes. I'm tired of playing with the stuff in my mom's purse. Speaking of purses, we are grateful for the gifts that have come out of wallets and purses this morning. May they be blessed and charged with the divine blessing to bring all life into a true unity consciousness where we can flourish together in heart and in society. And so it is. Amen. All right, my friends, we'll rise and seal the deal here. And as we rest within the heart in the quiet and open and unsealed mind, we are aware of this inner sanctuary where the voice of Holy Spirit speaks to us all day. Are we listening? May we listen. May we thirst for this listening until we are satisfied. And that satisfaction brings in the truth that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. All right, A Course in Miracles tomorrow night, 7:15 p.m. Thank you very, very much. Love you guys.